A doctor's duty is to save lives. But what happens when wealth clouds their judgment? In the heart of the city, a prestigious doctor, renowned for his skill, but infamous for his arrogance, turns away a desperate man in need of treatment. Dismissing him as just another burden on society, he sends him away without a second thought. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. When the tables turn and the doctor finds himself in dire need, the same man he abandoned holds his life in his hands. Will the doctor's past mistakes come back to haunt him? Or will he be granted a second chance? Before we dive into this powerful story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss stories that make you think, feel, and question what you'd do in the same situation. Dr. Michael Grant was the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. Tall, impeccably dressed, and always carrying an air of superiority, he wasn't just a doctor, he was a brand. People whispered his name in admiration. He was known for saving lives, but only those who could afford his expertise. At the prestigious Lexington Medical Center, Michael was the head of surgery. The hospital catered to the city's elite, a place where money dictated priority. To him, healthcare was a business, not a charity. While his skills were unmatched, his empathy had long faded behind expensive suits and luxury cars. One evening, after an exhausting 12-hour shift filled with VIP patients, Michael was making his way out of the hospital when a frail man blocked his path. His clothes were tattered, his face sunken, and his eyes held the kind of desperation that made people uncomfortable. "Please, doctor, I need help," the man begged, clutching his chest. Michael barely glanced at him. "The free clinic is 3 blocks down. I suggest you try there." "But I can't breathe," the man gasped, stumbling forward. Michael sighed, adjusting his Rolex. "Sir, I only take appointments, and unless you have insurance, I can't help you." A nurse rushed over, recognizing the man as Jacob Miller, a mechanic from a struggling neighborhood nearby. She pleaded with Michael. "Doctor, I think he's having a heart attack. We should up." Michael held up a hand. "Nurse, if we admitted every charity case, we'd be out of business." "Call security." The words cut deep. The security guards led Jacob outside. Despite his worsening condition, he was nothing more than a nameless face in Michael's eyes. As Michael got into his luxury car, Jacob collapsed on the sidewalk. The world moved on, but fate never forgets. Little did Michael know, the very man he dismissed so easily would soon decide his own fate. Dr. Michael Grant lived in a world where power and privilege reigned supreme. His life was a collection of extravagant dinner parties, high-profile charity events where he only donated for publicity, and weekends spent at exclusive golf resorts. People admired him for his surgical skills, but those who truly knew him saw the arrogance beneath the surface. Despite his prestigious career, there was one thing Michael never tolerated: weakness. To him, success was a choice, and poverty was the result of laziness. That's why when Jacob Miller had collapsed right outside the hospital, Michael hadn't even looked back. He had already moved on to the next high-paying patient. A week after turning Jacob away, Michael arrived at work only to be greeted by an uncomfortable silence. Nurses and doctors whispered in hushed tones as he walked past, their eyes filled with judgment. He frowned. "What's going on?" His assistant hesitated before handing him a tablet. "You need to see this, doctor." Grant Michael's eyes scanned the screen. A viral video. Someone had recorded Jacob's desperate plea outside the hospital. The clip showed Michael's cold dismissal, the way he had barely even acknowledged Jacob's suffering. The most haunting part came at the end, when Jacob collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for breath, and no one stopped to help. Michael's stomach tightened. The video had exploded online. People were outraged. Social media was flooded with comments. "How can a doctor be this heartless? This man is a disgrace to the medical profession. He let someone die just because they were poor." Michael's face grew hot. He turned to his assistant. "Where is Jacob Miller now?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "He survived. Barely. He had a heart attack but was taken to a public hospital just in time. He's recovering." Michael exhaled, but relief didn't come. This was bad. Worse than he had anticipated. In the following days, the backlash intensified. Patients canceled appointments. The hospital's board of directors held an emergency meeting. Sponsors pulled their funding. Michael tried to do damage control. He issued a public statement saying, "We cannot treat everyone, but we always strive to provide the best care possible within our resources." It backfired. News outlets picked up the story. Protesters appeared outside the hospital, holding signs that read, "Healthcare is not just for the rich," and "Justice for Jacob." Then came the final blow. One afternoon, Michael was called into the hospital's executive boardroom. The senior director sat across from him, their expressions grim. "Dr. Grant," the chairman began, "we've always valued your contributions, but your recent actions have severely damaged our hospital's reputation." Michael forced a smirk. "Come on, this will blow over. Just give it time." The chairman's gaze was steely. "We can't afford to wait. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending further review." Michael's world tilted. "Suspended?" he scoffed. "You can't be serious." "This is not up for debate," the chairman said firmly. "Gather your things." The room spun around him. Michael stormed out, his chest tight with rage and disbelief. In the weeks that followed, Michael's life crumbled. His suspension turned into a permanent termination. Other hospitals refused to hire him. His name was tainted. Lawsuits followed, with Jacob's family pressing charges for medical negligence. His luxury car, his penthouse, his elite social circle, all of it vanished. Within months, Michael went from being one of the city's most respected surgeons to a pariah. But the worst was yet to come. One evening, Michael sat alone in his now modest apartment, staring at the stack of unpaid bills. His phone buzzed. He answered, his voice hoarse. "Hello? Dr. Grant?" The voice on the other end was urgent. "It's your mother. She's collapsed." Michael's heart stopped. "She needs immediate surgery," the doctor continued. "But there's a problem. The procedure is highly specialized. The only surgeon qualified for it is out of town, and the second best option—" Michael gripped the phone. "Who is it?" A pause. Then the doctor's voice returned. "Jacob Miller." Michael's breath caught in his throat. "Jacob Miller? That can't be right," the doctor continued. "He used to be a mechanic, but he was also studying medicine at night. He just recently completed his surgical training. He's one of the only doctors available who can perform the procedure your mother needs." Michael felt the weight of irony crash down on him. The very man he had once deemed unworthy of medical care now held his mother's life in his hands. Michael rushed to the hospital. The moment he saw Jacob in a white coat, he hesitated. Jacob looked different, stronger, more confident. But there was something in his eyes, something that made Michael's stomach churn. Jacob met his gaze, arms crossed. "Doctor?" "Grant." Michael swallowed his pride. "Jacob, my mother. She needs your help." Jacob studied him for a long moment. Then in a calm, measured tone, he said, "And why should I help you?" Michael's chest tightened. "Please, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have turned you away that day. I was arrogant, selfish. But I'm begging you, don't let my mother suffer because of my mistakes." Jacob exhaled. He had every reason to walk away, every reason to turn his back, just as Michael had once done to him. But then he glanced at the hospital bed where Michael's mother lay, pale, fragile, fighting for her life. He sighed. "I don't do this for you. I do this because no one deserves to be denied care." Without another word, Jacob turned and walked toward the operating room. Michael stood frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of his own failure. He had spent his whole life believing that wealth defined worth, but now he understood the truth. Jacob Miller stood at the scrub sink, washing his hands methodically as he prepared for surgery. The rhythmic sound of water running over his fingers was the only thing grounding him. He had performed this procedure before. He was trained, ready, but this time it felt personal. Through the glass of the operating room, he could see Michael Grant pacing in the hallway, his face pale, his hands trembling. For the first time, the once powerful doctor looked powerless. Jacob took a deep breath and then turned to his team. "All right, let's begin." The surgical lights blazed to life, illuminating Michael's mother lying on the table. Her frail chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. The monitors beeped steadily, but Jacob knew time was running out. He picked up the scalpel. Outside the OR, Michael sat with his head in his hands. This wasn't supposed to be his life. He was the best. He was supposed to be the one saving lives, not begging for help. But now he had to trust the man he had once discarded like nothing. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Dr. Grant?" He looked up to see an older nurse. She had worked at Lexington Medical when he was still there. "I just wanted to say, I hope this experience changes you." Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" She folded her arms. "For years, you treated patients like customers. You refused to help people unless they could pay. But now you understand what it's like to be powerless, don't you?" Michael clenched his jaw. He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't understand. But she did. For the first time in his life, he had no control, and it terrified him. Inside the OR, Jacob was deep into the procedure. The incision was made. The delicate work of repairing the damage to the heart had begun. But then, the monitor let out a sharp, shrill beep, beep, beep. One of the assisting surgeons looked up, eyes wide. "Her blood pressure is dropping fast." Jacob's heart pounded. "She's going into cardiac arrest. We need to stabilize her now." A nurse moved quickly, handing him the necessary tools, but his hands hesitated for a fraction of a second. A voice echoed in his mind. Michael's cold dismissal that night outside the hospital. "I only take appointments, and unless you have insurance, I can't help you." For a fleeting moment, he had the power to do nothing, to let karma take its course. But then he shook his head, snapping out of it. No, he wasn't Michael Grant. He wasn't someone who turned his back on those in need. "Get the defibrillator ready," he ordered. The machine was rolled closer, and Jacob took the paddles in his hands. The electricity crackled as he pressed them against her chest. "Clear!" A jolt surged through her body. The monitor still flatlined. "Again!" Another jolt. For an agonizing 5 seconds, there was nothing. Then, a faint but steady beep. 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 The surgical team exhaled in relief. The crisis had passed, but Jacob's heart was still racing. He glanced through the OR window and caught sight of Michael watching in sheer panic. For a split second, Jacob saw something in Michael's eyes that he had never seen before. Not arrogance, not indifference, fear, real human fear. 2 hours later, the surgery was complete. Jacob walked out of the OR, peeling off his gloves. His face was unreadable. Michael leapt to his feet. "How is she?" Jacob met his gaze. "She's stable. The surgery was a success." Michael's body sagged in relief. He ran a hand down his face, unable to contain his emotions. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Jacob." Jacob didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the man in front of him. He had imagined this moment differently. Imagined telling Michael that he wouldn't lift a finger to help him, just as Michael had once done to him. But seeing Michael now, broken, humbled, he realized something. Revenge wouldn't have changed anything. "You owe me nothing," Jacob finally said. "You owe them everything." Michael frowned. "Them?" Jacob gestured around the hospital. "The patients you turned away. The people you refused to help. You can't undo what you did to me, but maybe you can make sure it doesn't happen to someone else." Michael swallowed hard. He had spent his entire career believing that only money mattered. But in the past few hours, he had seen more humanity in Jacob than he had ever seen in himself. "Tell me what to do," he said quietly. "I don't want to be that man anymore." Weeks passed. Michael stayed by his mother's side as she recovered, but he didn't return to his old life. He couldn't. Instead, he did something he never imagined. He went back to the same public hospital where Jacob had trained, the same place he had once dismissed as beneath him, and he applied for a job. At first, the staff was hesitant. They knew who he was. They had seen the video. They had heard the stories. But Michael was different now. He didn't demand the best equipment. He didn't expect VIP treatment. He simply worked. Day after day, he treated patients. Rich, poor, insured, uninsured. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be a doctor. And then one evening, as he was finishing his shift, he saw Jacob walking down the hallway. They locked eyes. Jacob smirked. "You still here, Grant?" Michael smiled, genuinely, for the first time in a long time. "I think I'm finally where I belong." Jacob nodded. "Good." And with that, he walked away, knowing that justice had been served in the best way possible. by changing a man's heart. Because true redemption isn't about revenge, it's about transformation. Months passed, and Michael's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. He had left behind his life of luxury, trading his penthouse for a modest apartment close to the public hospital. His days were filled with long hours of patient care, often working alongside Jacob, who had become both a mentor and a friend. The change in Michael was undeniable. The arrogance that once defined him had been replaced by humility, his demeanor softer, his words more thoughtful. He didn't just treat his patients. He listened to them, understood their struggles, and gave them the care they deserved. The once proud doctor who had turned away those in need now sat with the homeless, held the hands of the elderly, and offered compassion to the poor and vulnerable. But it wasn't just about his professional life. Michael's personal relationships began to heal too. He reached out to his estranged mother, who had been a distant figure in his life for years. Their conversations were no longer filled with tension or unspoken resentment. Instead, they were marked by honesty and a newfound connection. She saw the man he was becoming, and she couldn't have been prouder. Even the board members of Lexington Medical Center had heard whispers of his change. Some were skeptical, but others recognized the genuine shift in his character. A few months later, they reached out with an offer for Michael to return, this time not as a high-priced surgeon for the wealthy, but as a mentor for the younger doctors. The hospital, in its own way, had realized that perhaps the best way to restore their reputation wasn't by pretending nothing had happened, but by embracing change. Michael was torn. He was tempted by the old comforts of luxury, the status and recognition that he had once craved. But then, he thought of the faces he had seen in the public hospital, patients who would never know what it was like to have access to elite care, patients who didn't even have the privilege of walking into a building with marble floors. He chose to stay. As for Jacob, his own life had taken a turn. He had been offered a position as a senior surgeon at the same hospital where Michael now worked, and he had accepted it eagerly. But Jacob had always been different from Michael. His path had never been about wealth or prestige. He had been content with helping others in whatever way he could, whether it was fixing an old car or performing life-saving surgery. Jacob's sense of purpose had only deepened after saving Michael's mother. He never let the recognition go to his head. Instead, he used his position to continue advocating for those who couldn't afford the care they desperately needed. He partnered with local clinics, held free health camps for underserved communities, and even started a scholarship program for aspiring medical students from disadvantaged backgrounds. He often found himself reflecting on his own journey, how he had gone from a mechanic with a dream to a respected doctor with the power to change lives. But more importantly, he had never forgotten the lesson he had learned that fateful day when Michael had turned him away. He knew that true success wasn't measured by the wealth you amassed or the accolades you earned. It was measured by the lives you touched. The unlikely friendship between Michael and Jacob grew stronger over time. Their bond wasn't just rooted in gratitude or guilt, it was founded on mutual respect. Michael had learned humility, and Jacob had learned forgiveness. Together, they became a force for good in the hospital, pushing for reforms that prioritized patient care above profit. One evening, as they sat together in the break room after a particularly challenging surgery, Jacob turned to Michael and said, "You know, I used to think I'd be the one teaching you how to be a better person, but it turns out you've taught me a thing or two as well." Michael chuckled, a genuine laugh that came from the heart. "Guess we both learned something, huh?" Jacob nodded. "Yeah, the world doesn't owe us anything, but we can still make a difference, one person at a time." The public hospital where Michael now worked began to see the ripple effects of his transformation. Patients who had once been afraid to seek help from a doctor who didn't understand their struggles now felt more comfortable. The staff, too, began to change, as Michael and Jacob led by example, showing everyone that medicine wasn't about the status of the patient, but the sanctity of life itself. Word spread, and soon other doctors who had once been part of the elitist system followed Michael's lead. They left their comfortable offices in the private sector and joined the public hospital, bringing their skills to those who needed them the most. The hospital became a beacon of hope for the poor and the disenfranchised, providing high-quality care regardless of income or status. People no longer feared coming to the hospital because they couldn't afford it. And with Michael at the helm of their transformation, The hospital's reputation began to shift, not just in the eyes of the wealthy elite, but in the hearts of the community. The story of Michael Grant and Jacob Miller is one of transformation, forgiveness, and redemption. It is a reminder that no matter how high we rise in life, no matter how powerful we become, we are all human. We all make mistakes. We all have moments of weakness, arrogance, and pride. But what truly defines us isn't the mistakes we make, it's how we choose to learn from them. Michael's journey wasn't just about losing everything he had, it was about gaining something far more valuable, a sense of purpose. He learned that money and status could never replace the satisfaction of knowing you've done something good, something meaningful. He learned that real success isn't about how many lives you can save in the operating room. It's about how many lives you can change for the better, simply by being kind, compassionate, and willing to serve. And Jacob's journey wasn't about proving a point or seeking revenge. It was about recognizing that true power lies in forgiveness. He could have walked away from Michael, left him to suffer the consequences of his actions. But instead, he chose to help because he understood that healing wasn't just about fixing broken bodies. It was about healing hearts and restoring faith. The hospital they worked at became a symbol of this change, a place where healing wasn't determined by wealth, but by the will to care. And as for Michael and Jacob, their friendship became the heart of that transformation, a constant reminder that even in the face of betrayal, there is always the possibility of redemption. As we look at the story of Dr. Michael Grant and Jacob Miller, we are left with one powerful question. How often do we allow our assumptions, our pride, and our fears to define how we treat others? The truth is, we are all capable of great mistakes, but we are also capable of great growth. Every action, every decision, every encounter with another person is an opportunity for change, a chance to be better, to do better, to lift someone up instead of tearing them down. We don't have to wait for the world to come crashing down around us to change. We can start right now. Because the most meaningful transformations often happen when we least expect them, and when we choose to open our hearts and minds to the possibility of a new path. And so, the moral of this story is clear. Redemption isn't something that happens to us. It's something we actively choose, every day, through the choices we make and the way we treat others. Michael learned this the hard way, but in the end, it was the greatest lesson he could ever have learned. May we all strive to be a little more like Jacob, kind, compassionate, and ready to forgive. And may we remember that it is never too late to change the course of our lives for the better. If you've enjoyed this story, and if it has left you with something to think about, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Join us for more stories of transformation, hope, and the power of change. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay inspired, stay compassionate, and we'll see you in the next video.